Living my bucolic life, 3 out 2 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and something, and will the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. So this time I am going to be sewing a knit dress, and it's going to be a pattern that I've had for quite some time, and I've been delaying it because it's one of those Palmer plush tissue fitting method patterns. So just letting you know ahead of time, there is an old video where I went step by step through their tissue fitting method and it almost killed me, you know? Not saying anything about their method. It's just not compatible with who I am, okay? So I'm not going to be going step by step through their tissue fitting method here. I'll try to put a link in the description to that old video if you're really interested in that. But I am gonna make this dress, and it is to be made out of a knit fabric. So I do have this very fun looking knit, you know? Looks like a tie-dye project. And it's a relatively thick knit. It's not a super lightweight one, so I'm happy with that. The version that I'm going to be doing, I haven't decided yet. I'm tossing up, you know, since I am in this whole mode of, yes, my arms can see daylight again kind of mode. I'm kind of playing with this one, but I'm not too sure that I want it that long, just because I'm running up and down hills and up and down stairs all the time, and I tend to trip on really long dresses. So I might do something, you know, somewhere between this length and that length, you know. So that's my thought right now. I haven't even opened the envelope yet, so we'll explore this together. Hopefully I will read the instructions ahead of time enough that I won't screw anything up. So let me get that envelope opened and we'll get started. Okay, so I wanted to give you a look at the instructions as I see them. And the first thing is, they do have the whole thing in French too, if that's your thing. They have this, which is kind of cool because it's the anatomy of the pattern. And it's going to give you a little quick look at how it works. And I like this pattern because it's got this really neat foldy drape that's actually going to shape the front, okay? So you can get a look of what's going on. We're going to have a little center pleat here. There are some gathers here. It's self-lined, and even with the sleeveless version, it's self-lined up to the sleeves, so it looks like we're not going to have to deal with a hem at the sleeves, which is kind of fun. And then it's got this interesting shape up here, which is going to give us this, okay? So I'm glad they do that. It's like a cheat sheet up front as to what's going on. What I wanted to show you is they have an entire page, you know, starting here on their whole tissue pattern fitting method. And even though I am not going to go through it because it hurts me to think about doing that again, I am reading through it because they do give you good ideas of if you know your body size is going to need certain adjustments. It's a good cheat sheet on how to make those adjustments. So if you typically need to do a full bust adjustment or a low bust adjustment or something like that, it's going to show you how to do that, okay? So even though I'm not going to be doing the thing where I fit the tissue paper onto my body and all of that, just because I know in general that's an adjustment I have to do, I'm going to use their guideline to do it so that, you know, you can see how that's going to work. If you are doing sleeves and you usually have to blow out the bicep, which I usually do, they're showing you how to do that. And that's a method that I usually use, and I've done that on a lot of different videos. So we're not going to do that because I have decided I am doing the sleeveless version. So yeah, let me go ahead and get all of my pieces cut out, but we are going to be making this low bust, full bust adjustment, just so that we can say that we're trying to go along with their pattern, you know, somewhat. So anyway, let me move on. The other thing is, for the length, because everyone's length is different, their view A, which is the long one down here, it says for size 16, which I'm going to be doing, that their finished length is 54¼ inches from the base of my neck to the finished edge. That is way too long for me. I want something closer to 45, okay? So what I'm going to do is take, because this is 54, what I want is 45, I'm going to take on their pattern here, the bottom mark where they have for cut here for view A, and I'm going to shorten that by 9 inches. I'm just going to mark where 9 inches is all the way across, and then just cut along those marks. Because it is slightly curved, so you can't just lay a ruler and go straight across. You have to kind of hit it incrementally and then make that cut. So I'm going to do that on both my skirt back and skirt front pieces. While I'm cutting these out, I wanted to point out, I don't always do this, but on this particular pattern, there's a lot of very, very wrinkled pieces. So before I actually place this onto my fabric and cut it out, I will iron it. And I'll use no steam, just a dry iron, just to quickly iron it out. And that's going to get out all those wrinkles, so I know that I'll get a true size of my pattern instead of one that's all, wrinkled up. Okay, so for this bodice front adjustment we're going to make, for the back, there is a bodice back and a back facing piece, and for the front, there is also a front and a front facing piece, okay? So we're going to need to make the same adjustment on both pieces, but they're going to look slightly different because the front has all of this extra stuff on it. The back is smaller because it's assuming by the time you've put this in that you've already gathered the bottom, you've already made the pleats and everything. So this is smaller, but they do go together. And it looks like in their instructions, they're showing it more on the facing piece than on the front. So we're going to go step by step through their steps here on the facing, and then once that's done, I'll show you what the completed adjustment looks like on the front, because it'll be the same thing, it's just going to look a little bit different. So you're going to need a stash of extra tracing paper, so I'm going to get a little piece of that cut off. And on the pattern itself, they do have these lines already on it, okay? And they are numbered 1, 1, 1A, 3, 2, everything like that. So that's very helpful. Okay, so I'm hoping I have my camera up high enough that we're going to be able to see everything. I just have a piece of tissue paper that's basically a few inches bigger all the way around than my little piece here. And for my body, I know from a lot of past experience that things will fit me better if I do a full bust adjustment that adds 1 inch. Big, on this piece here, they have a finished bust adjustment of 42½ inches. So here's the thing. That is actually slightly bigger than my actual bust adjustment. So I'm kind of debating on what to do, because different fabrics fit differently, and this is made out of a knit. If this was a pattern that was made out of a very tightly woven fabric and everything, I would say, oh yeah, 100%, I am jumping all over making my fullest bust adjustment that I can, because there is no give in a very tightly woven garment. This, it's not. It stretches, it's soft, it's fabulous. So instead of going full bore for my biggest, I am going to do a 1/2 inch full bust adjustment. That's enough that we'll be able to see the process, but it's not going to make it too gapey, all right? So based on their instructions and with all of that TMI kind of information, I am going to be on page 2 of their 8 pages of instructions, starting out down here where they tell you to cut to line 1, and this is the apex, the circle. That's supposed to be where the fullest point is. okay? My fullest point is usually 1 inch lower. But this does not have darts. This just has that funky wrap. So because it has that wrap and not a specific dart, I'm not gonna get too fanatical about dropping that. But I do believe that with what they're doing, they're gonna take that into consideration somehow. So, you know, we'll work it out. But the first thing I need to do is cut up line number 1. Come on, cut straight for me, Marie, here. Okay, and line number 1 out here. Out here, I am not cutting all the way out. I'm gonna leave a funky little hinge of fabric, or not fabric, of tissue paper there at the edge so I can open it up, okay? The part on this that's gonna stay the same is this over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and tape that to my paper, and I have a little bit going over the edge, so it's going to tape it to my table too, so hopefully everything's going to stay secure there. So this part over here is taped over. I want to leave this open because I'm going to need to cut that too. But right now we're just dealing with this part. Okay, now it's what, I actually put another piece of tape here to hold that still also. What we're doing is widening this until the point between this point and this piece of tissue paper is the width that I want. Remember, I decided I'm going with 1/2 inch. So if I put my little ruler there, right about there, that point to this space is 1/2 inch, okay? So that needs to stay put right there. So I'm gonna stick this right there, okay? So that part is good. This is still loose, this is still loose, okay? But we can't have this just going open like that at the side. So what I'm going to need to do now is come in here to line number 2, and I'm going to cut it from the outside going towards that little apex circle, but I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch of that paper uncut, okay? So I actually should line this up so it's on the grid of my cutting board here. So I'm lining this edge here up with that little grid on my table because that's going to help me a lot. I can barely see through here to the grid lines underneath. I know you probably can't. I can. You'll just have to take my word for it. If you have a grid type of a table, very handy, okay? And that's going to be good because at this point, I need to make this somewhat straight, okay? So since we made this cut, I'm going to lower it until this bottom is pretty flat. See how this is flat coming across here? I want this bottom to be kind of flat too. I don't think it's, you know, has to be like within 1/16 of an inch or something because we are going to have some gathers down here at the bottom, you know. But what I want you to see is this part is now lower than this part. Let me move my camera a bit, okay? So this line here, line 3, that's going to come into play now because I'm going to have to cut across here at line 3, holding this down and lower this so that it's at the same level down here, okay? So I'm making sure this side of it is in line over here where it should be. And that looks pretty good to me. That does. So I'm going to put a piece of tape over here. Come on, holding that together. Okay, and this is primarily if you just need a full bust adjustment, not a low bust adjustment. But here's the thing, if you go on, the next step down is if you need a low bust adjustment. So we're going to go ahead and do that too, just for funsies. And what they are saying is leave this up where it was, okay? This is still low here, but because we did full and low, we need to add some space down here. So that's why it's important to have your tissue paper a little bit bigger. So I need to hold this piece in place like so. And over here, because I'm doing the full and low bust adjustment, you know, and because it is gathers, you know, it's okay that, I suppose, according to their pattern, because that's what they have in their instructions here, I suppose it's okay that this side is coming out a little bit more, okay? Because what they're gonna have you do is just draw onto the bottom the extra fabric that we're gonna need. So I'm taping this closed here, getting my ruler, and do they tell you how much? They just say to add what you need, okay? Well, I am going to say that I need to add 3/4 of an inch at this center point here, okay? So I'm gonna cut that here, and actually, I need to pretend there's a little more here. It's veering in a little bit, but pretend my little scrap paper comes out totally straight. Okay, so under this point, up to about the point where this is here, I'm just going straight across, okay? And at that point, I need to angle this up so it's gonna match up where the seam line is, which is right about here, about 5/8 of an inch in from that outside edge. And that's important because, oops, that didn't draw, because that way it will match up with your bodice back piece, and you don't need to make any adjustments on the bodice back piece, okay? So this then is going to be my bodice front facing. I'm gonna go ahead and cut it out around the edge. I'll just tape a little piece over here so you can see how that looks. Okay, so now this is all cut out. I'm just adding a couple more pieces of tape to hold it securely. All right, and I did add this little bit there just so it's completely straight. So this is my bodice front facing. I'm gonna do the same thing to my bodice front, and I'll show you what it looks like just because the piece is shaped differently, but I am gonna go through the same exact steps. One of the only main differences is that this piece is cut the opposite way. So whereas everything is going this direction with the side seam over here on this thing has the side seam over here. Same process, just different direction and different shape up here and things like that. While I'm doing this, I wanted to point out, if you've gone through all the effort to do this and the thought of doing it flipped mirror image is just pushing you over the edge, there is absolutely nothing wrong with doing this from the back side so that everything is just the same, because we're going to be cutting one on a fold, so it's going to end up being a mirror image type of a deal. I'm just going to do it this way, just, you know, to have something different to look at when we're done. So let me go ahead and get my big tissue paper set up over here and start cutting my line 1 and the line 1 this way, okay? It's gonna look different. I'm just pointing out another thing really quick. On this one, line 1 here goes straight up the shoulder, and this doesn't look like it does, but it does. This is the shoulder, this is just that extra neck piece up there. One other difference I wanted to show you is, remember on this one, it was just a flat adding, don't know what that is right there, just adding a flat space there. On this one, it is curved, okay, like that. So I am just putting my ruler up here and making little marks 3/4 of an inch all the way until I am just below this point, just like on the other one. I'm assuming that they have that kind of figured out. So, whoopsie, here I am, 3/4 of an inch down is here, and here, and here. And then from this point, remember, I'm just kind of aiming it over to the position where it is 5/8 of an inch in for that seam allowance, okay? So from here, it's actually fairly straight because it was angled up, and this is going to be my new cut line over here. Okay, and I'm just following this straight down to make that match up. Okay, so now this is going to be my new cut line right here, Everything else is pretty much the same, the way that I did it. It's just angled slightly different, but following the same cut lines. Okay, so let me go ahead and get this cut out. I'm going to use these two pieces as I cut out my fabric, and I'm pretty much going to be following their pattern layout, I'm assuming. Well, I don't have it on this page. Where is it? Okay. So here's their pattern layout. As you can see, there's the two skirt pieces, which I shortened 9 inches. The pockets, so you're going to have 4 pocket pieces all together. All of these bodice pieces are cut on the fold, and then there's some midriff bands. So let me go ahead and get all of that cut out, and I'll meet you back here. Hello there. I am editing this video, and I wanted to point out at this time the midriff pieces that I'm going to be cutting out, they are just rectangles. And because I added at this point here a gap in my front pieces of my bodice for that full bust adjustment, that's going to kind of come back and give me a little bit of trouble later on when I'm trying to match up the bodice to the midriff piece. Okay, so I'm just letting you know when you see that later and I'm kind of confused onto why my bodice top isn't exactly matching up to where the midriff is, it's because of this. And just to let you know, obviously, it did work out. The midriff piece, as it is in the pattern envelope, ended up fitting me fine. So I would suggest when you're making your gathers at that point, just make them to the size of the midriff piece instead of to the size of the back facing. You'll see when you get there. I just wanted to point that out. Okay. I am cutting out my skirt, and I wanted to point out my pattern is not going to match exactly. I am off by probably about 4 inches. And the reason is that the repeat on this fabric is huge. It's like, what is that? About 24 inches per repeat. So if I tried to match it exactly, I wouldn't have enough room to cut out all my bodice pieces. We don't want that. So basically what that means is down here at the bottom, this is my skirt back, my skirt front, this line's going to be right about here. It's a tie-dye looking thing. To me, because it's a tie-dye print, that means it's easy going, and I'm fine with that, with my patterns not matching exactly on the sides. I hope that you are too. I know that I will get some comments from someone just having an absolute cow because they're not matching, but you know what? Sometimes you can't. Sometimes the repeat on patterns are just too big, you know? Because see, it has this double here, and then you have a big space with a single, and then you have another double way up here. So the distance between this piece and this piece right here, that is my repeat. It's huge, you know. So it is what it is. Hope you don't mind. And I'm just going to proceed on cutting out my pattern. Okay, so to go ahead and get started, the first piece we're going to work on is the bodice front. And I'm going to try to follow their instructions because they are very specific, so that's good. The first thing that I need to do, though, is take this off of my fabric because I need to mark a whole bunch of things, but I need to mark it on the wrong side of my fabric. And I have this placed so the right side is up. So let me open this up like a butterfly and look at the wrong side first. One of the first things that they're going to have you do, and they're going to have you just mark it and not sew it at this point, is to draw the stitching line down here at this V, okay, and just the bottom part. So I would say maybe about 2.5 inches above I'm going to start, and I'm laying my ruler so I see 5/8 of an inch lined up with that cut edge. And I am using my heat erasable pen. They say to use chalk, and if you want to use chalk, please, by all means, use your chalk. But for me, my heat erasable pen works fine, especially on a knit, because with chalk you have to kind of press down and drag, and that wants to stretch it, you know. So I am drawing my line here, and I want to make sure that I have my line all the way to the point where those two are intersecting right there, okay? So I don't know if you can see that. I hope you can, but there's my little V drawn on. The other thing I need to do is over here on the side, on the pattern, there is a dot right here. I'm gonna punch that dot out with my thick piece of leather, very thick, my little hole punch, and I'm going to transfer that dot over. I'm just going to do this one over here where you can see because the other one's on the other side. And draw that dot in place. And they're going to have you stitch this to reinforce this little area here. So do they say how long? I don't think they are. I'm just going to draw a line a couple inches on each side of that dot at 5/8 of an inch, okay? And again, trying not to stretch my fabric. So there's one, and at 5/8 of an inch right here, there's two. So you can see where I actually put the dot in, it's not exactly on that line. I'm using my lines I drew. And so using a regular sewing length stitch, you know, not super wide for basting, not super narrow, just stitching it along this line, you know, making sure that at this point I leave my needle down and pivot and come down. I am just going to be, I'm going to use Rosie, my regular, you know, heavy duty flatbed, old timey sewing machine. And I think that that's going to be just fine. So let me get that marked on this side and get that stitched in. The last thing that we're going to need to do on this is to mark where that front pleat is. So let me get this put in and then we'll deal with that pleat. Okay, so I want you to see, I've got those stitching lines put in, okay? So now the last thing is down here on the bottom. Knits, gotta love them here. Okay, there is a pleat line down here. And remember I extended my pattern. So if I can find my ruler, what I am going to do is just draw this pleat line lower. So at the bottom edge here, this line is 1 inch from the cut line, or from the folded center front edge, okay? So I'm just going to draw that in 1 inch there. And knowing that this line is just over 2 inches long, and at the very top it is 1 1/8 inch, okay? So at about 2 inches up, I'm going to put just a little dot so I know where that is. Up here, measure out 1 1/8 inch and connect them. It's probably not critical that you go through all that mess, but you know what? I am. So up here at the top of my new line, sticking my thick piece of leather underneath my tissue, and punching out a hole there so I can mark where that is. Okay, so then carefully spreading out my piece of fabric here. All right, and lining up my bottom cut edges here. Where the bottom of this little pleat line is, I'm just making a tiny little mark on my fabric, and up here at the top where that hole is punched out, punching that. And I'm also making a little line here at the center front, okay? Because when I flip this over, I want to make sure that I'm lining up this bottom corner here, but also that I'm lining up this center front because it's a knit, and look, it does want to stretch. It does want to stretch. Oh my goodness. And it's possible that I've just stretched out one side as I laid it down. So I'm just going to bunch it up a bit, smooth it back down. If I have this as my center front, lining up that V to this point, it actually, yep, that's my center front. I'm just going to draw a line all the way down, if I can, because knits being what they are, they want to move. Okay. So if I lay this here, matching up this center front, which is right here, it's not actually the edge of my tissue paper, it's a little bit lower. I mean, it's in a little bit, so I'm matching up my center front And this side over here, it might have stretched out while I was cutting it. That does happen too. But here's the thing, it's a knit. I'm not going to stress too much. I'm going to move this over to the far edge, and basically my pleat might be a little bit deeper than what they intended. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So if you are working on a knit and it's not behaving well, well, join the club, because it is not behaving well knit day. All right, so these two lines here that I just drew, the top dot and the bottom, this is going to be my center dart, okay? From this point over, it matches the pattern. From this point over, it matches the pattern. So taking my extra out in here, that just seems to make sense to me. So what I need to do is fold this in half, and we're gonna make kind of like we're making a dart. I'm gonna stick my pin down in the little dot on one side, and it needs to come back up in this dot on the other side, okay? So it's going down at the top of the line over here, coming back up at the top of the line over there. Okay, I'm just gonna pull that pin all the way through, and that is gonna put my center front about 1/8 of an inch off, but it's gonna be way down in the midriff area, and that is fine. The world will not come to an end, I promise. All right, so I wanna make sure that the bottom of my lines are pretty well matched up, and stick a pin there. And then I'm gonna go over to my sewing machine and sew up this little line right here. And I believe we stitch it up the entire way. Let me check here. It says stitch along solid line, back stitching at the end. So yes, I'm going to sew from the bottom all the way up to this stop. Okay, you know, reinforce it. And then that's gonna make our little center front pleat. Okay, so here is that little center front pleat. I'm gonna open this up like this, still looking at my wrong side. Open this up so it's gonna lay flat. Let me just stick my finger inside that pleat and push it down, okay? And I'm gonna go ahead and just put a little row of stitching across the bottom here at about 1/4 inch in, just to lock that down. And then I'm gonna press this to erase that center front line, because honestly, since it's slightly off center, it's driving me nuts right now. So let me go ahead and do that, stitch it, press it, and I'll be right back. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna need to do is put gathering stitches in. Now, at the bottom here, there is a notch. Again, I've extended it down, so I'm just putting a little line where the notch for my size is, over here and over here. Now, in the instructions, I am deviating at this point. What they are going to tell you to do is to put 3 rows of gathering stitches 1/8 of an inch apart up to this point, you know, with threads here, and then 3 rows of gathering stitches 1/8 inch apart to this point, okay? That just sounds like way too much to me. What I'm gonna do is put 2 rows of gathering stitches, starting here, going all the way across at about 1/4 inch, and then another one in a little bit from there, between 3/8 and 1/2 an inch, all the way across. So I only have my ends of my thread sticking out at this point and this point. I think that is just fine in my opinion, so that's what I'm gonna do. So just, you know, putting my, I'm not going to use my heavy duty bobbin thread. This is a short enough gather. I think that just using the regular thread in my machine is fine. But being aware of when I sew it on, because the bobbin threads are going to be a lot easier to pull than the needle threads on the machine. So I'm going to sew it so that I have my needle threads this side, my bobbin threads are on the right side, okay? Okay, so I've got that done and I've set that piece aside. We need to work on our bodice back. There are going to be gathering stitches across the bottom of the bodice back also, so I need to be aware of where this little notch is here. I'm just going to go ahead and clip that in so I can see it. There's a double notch on the sleeve, the armhole here. I'm not worrying about that because I'm not matching up for a sleeve. Up here at the top there is a dot, but I do not believe that we are dealing too much with that dot right now. I will punch it out and mark it on the wrong side. But what I'm going to need to do is, because you know, I have this pinned to the right side of my fabric, open it up and transfer that little dot right here, which is about 5/8 of an inch in both ways. There's a little dot up there. Sorry, you didn't see it. It's right there. But between this notch down here, that I'm just going to put an extra line on so I can see very clearly, and this notch over here, once again, they want you to do 3 rows of gathering stitches. I'm going to do 2 straight across here, just like I did on the front. Okay, so I've got my gathering stitches in down here at my bottom of my bodice back. Setting that aside, I need to get this front piece back out again. At the top, up here, there's another couple dots that I did not, for some reason, put on before, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and punch out. There's a smaller dot over on that side, a larger dot towards the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to lay this here. And what I do on this side, of course, I will do the same thing on the other, coloring in those dots. And where these notches are, I'm just going to put a couple little lines so I can find it. Okay, so doing that for both sides, between these 2 dots, which is, you know, 5/8 of an inch in to this point, I need to also run 2 rows of gathering stitches on the top of each one of these back neck kind of areas. That's what that is. So let me go ahead and get those put in. Okay, now it's starting to get a little confusing here in their directions. So we're just going to go word by word so that hopefully I won't get it wrong. So this is my front bodice piece. I've got my gathering stitches up here, okay? And what it says is fold it in half at that large dot. The large dot is where we stopped doing our gathering stitches here, okay? So I am folding that from that point. Yeah, that's it. From that point, I am folding it back so that the ends of my gathering stitches are at this fold right here, okay? And this part back here is, looks like about an inch or so shorter. We need to gather the front so it matches the back. So just to make my life easier, I am going to tie a knot over here on this side, just so that these stitches don't want to go anywhere while I'm fighting with their partners in the front here. Okay. So let me change the battery on my camera because it's about to die. Fold this over here, and I am going to pin this part over here, this raw cut edge. All right, I'm going to pin that together so that it will stay in place like this. And these threads on the right side, which are my bobbin threads, I'm going to give those a little tug to the point that the front is going to lay nice and flat and the edges of my strings are just coming straight off. So it's not a whole lot of gathers, just about like that. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead, oops, and pin it here. Okay, just to keep that fold in place, and move these gathers over so that they're going to be nice and even. All right, I double checked and I think that's right. I also think I need to order new batteries for my camera because they are dying rather quickly now. So basically at the end here, I made a big loop. I'm sticking the tip of my pin through that loop, sticking it down here so that, because I want to make a knot in my threads that I pulled, which are my bobbin threads, down here so it's not going to want to expand out. Because I'm going to need to open this up again, okay? I can't just leave these pins here forever. So let me cut off some of these threads down here, open it up so it looks like this. And I'm just going to leave this pin in here where the bobbin is. So basically from this point over it's flat, from this point over it is somewhat gathered, not a whole lot, but somewhat, okay? I need to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so with that done, I'm over here at my ironing board because the next step is that they want us to put a stay tape and stitch it across here to hold it in place. And I do have what they looks like in the instruction, they're using twill tape. And I have a 1/4 inch twill tape. It does not stretch, it's a stay tape, it's a sew on. So it looks like that would work for what they're wanting, but I'm not gonna use what they want. I'm gonna use a fusible. This is a strip of a 1 inch wide fusible. I got it from that 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞 catalog. Love their stuff. It's very lightweight, but because it's basically a muslin, a lightweight black muslin that has fusible dots on it. Okay, it's not gonna stretch. And I wanna use that. I think that will work better for me. So I'm just placing it over that little gathered area. You know, over here it's not gathered. Let me pull my pin out of there. That might be a good call. And just get that somewhat level. I like it because it is lightweight enough that it's not going to add bulk or show through from the outside. There we go. Okay, so now that's reinforced. I could have gotten a piece that goes all the way across. I just didn't. What I need to do now is match these two up like this and stitch them together at 5/8 of an inch all the way across here. Now that that is done, this is actually going to be the center back behind your neck. So I'm going to open this up and press this seam allowance open. Just lightly there. I don't want to like really stretch and press this whole knit because, you know, that could deform it, but just getting it hot and steamy and then pressing it with my hands, that's going to do it. So it's going to look like this on the outside. You can kind of see my little gathers, and then up here, well, ignore that little thread. I'll need to clip that out. But up here, it's flat. And I believe that when the collar is all done, it's going to be folded in half like that behind your neck. Okay, so now I've got my back bodice piece here, the one we put the gathering stitches on the bottom just a bit ago. And I feel like this is turning into a tape type of a project because I'm going to use, they want you to stay stitch this at a 1/2 inch. And you can if you feel like it. I am going to use another fusible stay tape on here instead. This one is a 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞, again from the 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐞.com. It's 1 inch wide and it's a knit 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞. Okay, so it's, I know from experience that it will hold a knit in the place it's supposed to, at least for the time being, okay? But because it's a 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞 knit, I can somewhat shape it. So what I'm gonna do, instead of doing a machine stay stitched on here, is just cut a piece of this off. Hang on, let me get my, using the big old whisk scissors today. I think those have got to be from like the 1950s. Thanks, Grandma. Okay, so I am just going to fuse it on. Now here's the thing. If I don't want to stretch my knit out of shape while I do this. The whole point of this is to keep this knit in the position that it is at, okay? So down here at the very center, I'm going to start tacking it, okay? So that is there. Up here, I'm going to bend it up. And it's a little ruffly there. It is. That's okay. I'm just going to put my iron straight down on top of it. And I have my non-stick Teflon sheet back here, okay? So I can peel that off very easily. Over here, I'm just going to do the same thing. And the reason I am not stay stitching at this point is I get a bad feeling from this knit that if I try to stay stitch it, I'm actually going to stretch it a little bit out of shape. It's just that simple. If I feel like I have a better chance of keeping the neckline in the original shape by fusing something to it than stay stitching, just because of the way that this knit has been acting so far. So with that, I'll just trim off this extra that's sticking out, okay? But if you can see, it is kind of a knit, and it's gonna hold it in place. And to me, that makes it worth it. So all of these little pieces that are just kind of sticking out, I'll just trim those off. It won't hurt anything, because honestly, they're gonna be encapsulated inside of the lining anyway, so that is just fine. Okay, so here's my back, grabbing my bodice front here. Remember way back when we did this funky little stitching there? What I need to do is clip this diagonal here up to, but not through, that stitching line, okay? So that it will open like that. And I need to do that on both sides. Here's the other side here. Okay, so now this whole thing is going to get matched up with the center back of this. So let me get it repositioned. Now when I ironed this, my little dot I made up here disappeared on my center, on my back piece. So I am just going to draw that little dot back in, because that's going to come into play here very quickly. Okay. All right, I can see those now. It's just little dots, okay? So the dot in this little corner thing that we just clipped, that position is going to match up with this dot here. Okay, I brought the camera in a little closer because I think that's important. All right, so remember we opened this up. I'm matching up this point with that dot I just redrew. Okay, down here below. This side here, okay, it's going to get lined up where it is even with the cut edge of like the shoulder piece of our back bodice, okay? I'm being aware of where this dot is, but I'm not being fanatical about it. This is the point that's more important to me, making sure that this point is 5/8 of an inch in, okay? So ouch, just poked myself. Let me go ahead and pin this in place first. And while I'm sewing it, I'm gonna sew it looking at this side so I can be aware of all of that stuff, okay? It would be good if I knew where the center back of this neckline is. So before I do anything else, I'm folding this in half. And I'm just gonna stick a pin right in that back spot there. Okay, so if this is my center back, where this little point is, it's off to the side, but I can see it. I'm gonna match up this seam line with where that point is, which is right here. Okay, got that there. And then come over onto this side. Again, we have our little piece that got cut. Lining up this corner over here. This needs to stay going flat, straight across. It's gonna wanna curve down. Don't let it, okay? And you want it to be at where this dot is, which is 5/8 of an inch in from each direction. So, keeping that nice and straight, I'm gonna put a pin here to anchor it, and one way over here on this side. Okay, you know what, just because it's knit and it's misbehaving, I'm sticking one in the middle here too. All right, now we need to do this part. And since I have my center back positioned, it should work out pretty well. I'm just gonna kind of lay it so that the raw edges are matching. Up here, where this point is, I really want this to be flat. If I need to do any easing, I want it to be closer to the back position. So I'm just opening this up. And if I look in the diagram, it looks like theirs is opened up fairly wide also. So that's good. We are on the right track. All right. And again, making sure that this seam line here is not drooping, that it's staying a nice corner. Okay, so it's going pretty straight across here and straight here. All right. Now it looks like this might be a little bit longer. Okay. I'm just going to kind of smush it down. If I had my iron on here and I smushed it, it would work itself in. It's a knit. We're gonna be able to. So it looks a little ruffly, if you can see. Not worrying about it, not worrying about it. Just putting extra pins, and when I sew it, if there is a tiny pucker, I'm putting it in the very back and it will blend, okay? But I don't think there will. I'm thinking at that 5/8 inch point, it's actually gonna be fairly flat. It's just more out here in the seam allowance that looks bigger. Okay, so let me go ahead and do the same thing, pinning this side here, and then I'll take you over to my sewing machine so I can show you how I'm gonna stitch this. Okay, so once again, we are using Rosie. So let me get the camera tipped down here so you can see the needle plate. Okay, so if you can see, I'm looking at the bodice front side, okay? The side there, I can see these little cutouts. So the first thing I do is I'm starting out here at the edge of one of my shoulders, okay? And I'm just, first thing I want to make sure is I got a straight line here, that this is not curving in at all, okay? So we're just going to head straight over. I'm going to slow down when I get to this corner, because I'm going to pull this pin out here and try to get, sorry, I pulled it out too quickly is what I did. All right, so with this pin just kind of sticking in there, all of this extra fabric, it's like a big fold, I am pulling over here out of the way so that I can continue straight up to where my pin is holding that corner down, all right? And I'm ending with my needle down, but making sure I am still, hang on, I'm gonna back up just a hair, but making sure I am going through this top fabric too, okay? Lifting up my presser foot, I'm flipping this whole fold to the back and then putting it back down. And then I'm going to continue along this stitching guideline here. All right, now I'm getting into this back area. Remember where we kind of had to smush it together? So to ease that, what I do is I put my fingernails over here on this side and over here on this side, and I pull it apart, okay? And that's actually going to push those threads kind of together. So, but like I said, if there is a pucker, I want it near the center back and not near the front. And it looks like I am going to have a little pucker, but it's in the center back, so that's okay. All right, so now here's my center back here. And going to do the same thing, working my way up to this point. This is the tricky bit up here, okay? So making sure that I have a straight line to go through, pulling all of this apart. Okay, again, a tiny pucker there, but I am not going to stress about that. And this point here, that's what I'm looking at. So I'm going to get my seam ripper here and just kind of hold that up where I need it to be so that my fingers are not holding it, but this point of my seam ripper is, so I can just keep going, pull this needle out. And again, ending with my needle down right there, but going through all of the layers, okay? Lifting my presser foot up, folding all of this stuff out of the way, making sure everything is lined up well, and putting it back down. Okay, and then continuing across. And making sure at the point that I end, if you've gone off track anywhere, at the point that you end, you're back at 5/8 of an inch, okay? Because sometimes when you're going around those corners and things happen, you know? Just make sure at the point that you're done, everything is right. So before you go clipping anything or trimming your seam allowances, because they're going to want you to do that, open it up and make sure you don't have a hole at this corner, okay? So if you can see, when I open it up, I don't have a hole there. That looks great. Let me open up this side and see how it looks. Because things happen, you know, sometimes things happen. All right, so I open that up. That looks great too. I'm very happy. If at this point you see some of your basting line from before, you know, it's okay. I can just pull those out up to the point that they disappear in that seam and then clip it, you know, and all will be well right here. Okay, so let me get all of this little detail stuff pulled off and I'll meet you back at the table. All right, so I just read it said to press these seams open when you're done. So that will be pressed open. I'm guessing they want this whole back to be pressed open also, but you can see if you do that, you're going to end up with some bulk right here. Okay, so I'm actually just going to clip some of that out because we don't need that kind of trouble in our lives. And that's going to let it lay a lot flatter right there. So I'm going to go ahead and press this whole seam open. If you have a pressing ham or a sleeve roll or something that you can just put in here so it can lay kind of at a curve while you're pressing it, that might work pretty well for you. Okay, so just out of curiosity, I put this on my dress form just to see what in the world we're dealing with here. So I've kind of folded this neckline in half, and doing that, the gathered part, I need to change my camera, hang on. Okay, so when I fold it in half, you can see the gathered part right there. The flat part is on the inside up against your neck. And I have not, this V is gonna be a little bit lower because remember we are stitching it down to like right about this point. So it's not hanging exactly perfect, but I can see that adding that 3/4 inch was probably a very good idea. That's gonna let it hang more appropriately here. But this fold is, it's making this fun little wrap kind of thing going on here where it starts at these pleats down here and then kind of comes up around the neckline. So it's actually really cool. I like it, you know, it's kind of fun. So anyway, we need to get started on the facing. So I'm just gonna leave this up here for a minute, you know, just to look at and be out of my way. Okay, so I'm getting my bodice front piece out here. And where I have a notch here, remember I did all of this kind of stuff, I'm just gonna assume directly underneath where that notch is where this notch should be. Just clipping that. And that's gonna be important because they're gonna have you stay stitch between it. Once again, I am going to use, I think I'm gonna use this tricot tape just because I have it still out, okay? And I'm just gonna fuse that going straight across. The point is that we need to reinforce this so this bottom isn't going to stretch because this is the position that we're gonna pull all the gathering threads off the bodice front to match, okay? And up here, we do have another one of these V-shaped stitching lines. At this point, I'm not sure if I'm looking at the front or at the front facing when I'm stitching that, so I'll probably, you know, copy that over too, which is basically drawing a line at 5/8 of an inch in until they come to a point, and I'll draw that on the wrong side. So, before I do that, over at my ironing board where I have my little notch cut, I'm going to open this up and try to place it very carefully so I'm not stretching it out of position. Take my fusible tricot tape and just place it from this point, which you cannot see over here, okay, where that notch is, and place it all the way across here, and it's going to lay nice and flat so I can cut it right here. Actually, I will do that right now and just take that little piece over, get that ironed on, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got my little V drawn in, my tricot tape is fused on, so that's all good. That is it for the front piece. Now I need to get my bodice back facing here, and we're going to sew that to the front up at the top shoulders. So let me grab that piece. I don't believe they're going to have us, you know, reinforce or stay stitch around the neckline of the back facing, just the back itself, which is interesting, but that's okay. So let me go ahead. This is my bodice front underneath here. Match up the bodice back. Get that placed well and stitch across here at 5/8 of an inch, both sides. And when I'm done, press the seam allowance open like that. Okay? Hello everybody, welcome back. It's actually been a couple days. I know you couldn't tell, but trust me, I can. So it's time to put the facing here. So this is my bodice, the outside one, the one with the funky collar and everything, and it is laying face up. And I'm going to get my facing and try to put it about the same direction. Okay, so with my back over here, my front over here, and it says that we need to get started matching it up, which is going to be interesting. So I'm just going to start up here at the front V because that seems like the most obvious place, and put a couple little pins here, one going in each direction to try to hold this somewhat misbehaving knit together. Okay, so with that, now I'm going to deal with the shoulders. Ooh, we can't deal with the shoulders. Okay, that's going to be interesting. Now, I can do with my center back though. So what I'm going to do is fold this in half and figure out exactly where the center back is here, and put a little pin right there just to hold that position. And the back of our funky neckline here where it was sewed together, which is right here, I'm going to place that up with my new center back position here, and I'm going to pin it on each side to keep this seam allowance open down here. Okay, all right, let me get this resituated here. I think if I put it on its side, it might make a little more sense. So this is the front, this is the back, that's what it looks like on the side. I'm just going to bring this up right about to where it wants to kind of fall naturally, and pin my little shoulder seam up here, again pinning both sides of my seam allowance open, just because that makes it a lot easier for them to stay going the right way when I'm sewing it. Okay, and I'll be doing the same thing on the other side, and then matching it up in between. And it looks like it's actually coming together pretty well that way. It looks kind of confusing when you get started, but I think it's all good. You want to make sure that what you're looking at here has that little V drawing that we put on earlier at the 5/8 of an inch point, because that's going to give you a good position to stitch. So what they're going to want you to do is, once you have the whole thing pinned together like this, is start on one shoulder, go all the way around, and then back up. But when you get down to this point, go all the way down here. Okay, what I would do is come down, take one stitch going straight over, and then pivot and come back up this way. So what I do is I come down, make a single stitch, and then go up. Okay, so let me get this side over here matched up, get over to my machine and get this neckline sewn, and I will be right back. All right, so I've got that stitched. Kind of a pain, not gonna lie, keeping everything straight going around, but it did sew up pretty well. Now in the instructions, what they're gonna say is they want you to trim this seam allowance by beveling it, which is basically holding your scissors almost flat when you cut it, which is kind of a way of grading it. To me, and by grading it means that one layer ends up being a slightly different length than the next layer. To me, for a knit, especially a knit as thin and flexible as this, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to grab pinking shears and go for it, and it'll do the same thing. If it was a thicker fabric, yes, I think that would be a good thing. A thicker woven or something too, yes, definitely. But for a knit like this, beveling it, there's not that much of a difference, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Down here at the little tip, I don't know if you can see, I have that one stitch over that I was talking about. The reason I like to do that is it gives me a definite place I can cut up to, and you can see I don't cut all the way up to it, I leave a little gap there, okay, without worrying about overlapping some of the stitching threads. So, and I'm just going to trim with my pinking shears on either side, taking off about half of the seam allowance like that. And I'm going to do that all the way around. Okay, so this next part can get confusing. What I would suggest is spend a couple minutes getting your garment kind of set right with the facing piece on the inside, your outside piece on the outside. I've got my funky collar piece here, and I just put one pin holding my back collar in half, just, you know, to try to get it to behave somewhat. I'm going to put my arm across the shoulder area here. Okay, so this is the shoulders, that's the back neck. This V here is my front neckline. What they're going to tell you to do is just press this little V part just up at the very tip of the V. Well, consider it pressed. I'm just doing that with my fingers right there. What they want you to do from this point is understitch the facing, okay? And if you can get it started on the right track, I'm hopeful that everything will carry through. So, actually I'm going to turn it this way. What it means is if I open this up, so I'm opening up one layer of my outer front bodice to my bodice facing here, okay? I'm just opening that up a bit. This is the little point. I am pushing my now trimmed seam allowances towards the facing side. And if this is the tip of my stitching, well, right here, I'm going to start actually understitching about 1.5 inches or so from that point, okay? So if this is the very tip of my little front V, I'm actually going to start right about here. And I'll end about the same distance on the other side of that V. But with that seam allowance being pushed over to the facing side, make sure it's to the facing side, I am going to do understitching, which means to do a straight stitch right on this side of this seam line, starting here and going all the way around. And that's going to take you to the back of the neck and everything. But the main thing is to make sure that you're stitching it on the facing side, not the exposed front bodice side, and that these seam allowances are always underneath the stitching. Okay, so I brought my camera over here just so you can see. While I'm working around, you have to kind of spread your garment out flat again, okay? So this is getting to that shoulder area. This is the back of my facing. I just went around, just went over that little back neckline area. But basically I'm feeling, this is the facing side, I'm feeling to make sure that my seam allowances are under here. And then I go a couple inches and stop with the needle down, double check to make sure I have all of my seam allowances going the right way. Go again, and just keep going that way. And it's a slow process, so take your time, make sure your seam allowances are always under the right way, because otherwise it's kind of pointless, you know. But this is the tip of my V, so I'm going to stop right around here. So I'm going to go ahead and hold that spot, making sure there's nothing else underneath here that I shouldn't be sewing over. And I'm like kind of lining up my seam line with the middle of this toe on my presser foot, just because I didn't feel like swapping it out for a special edge stitching kind of foot, because you don't need one. And this is the little final bit. So I'm just going to stop here, back it up a hair, and that's good. So my understitching is looking like this going around, okay? It's not right on the edge, but it's close enough. And underneath, I'm just tacking down this seam allowance here, okay? If you can see that, so that when I fold it the correct way, the facing, this is the outside of the edge, the facing should be kind of wrapped in towards the underneath. So I'm going to go over to my ironing board and try to get this somewhat situated in a logical looking shape, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm just holding the camera over here. Honestly, this is the most bizarre and complicated shape of a top I've dealt with in a while. And this opening, it reminds me of those old Sesame Street characters that do the telephone bring thing, you know the things I'm talking about, those fuzzy things. That's what this shape reminds me of. And, well, let's just hope that the next step makes it make a little more sense. Okay, so the instructions just said, you might want to try this on right now. I couldn't figure out how to try it on, so I put it on my dress form and I just clipped the sides of the outer bodice together because it's confusing. If I'm confused, let me know. Were you confused when you got to this step? Because it's kind of wild. Remember on the bodice front, we have gathering stitches going across the front, and they're going to be gathered to the facing here, so there's going to be some shaping here. And there's a midriff band that's about that wide here, and then the skirt. I don't know. It's confusing, but I think that at this point we're just going to keep going with it. So that's what it looks like right now. Again, I just have it kind of clipped together here. Who knows how this is going to turn out? Now, before I go too far, my camera's dropping here, the pattern instructions say when you try it on, make sure that your armhole is not going to be too low. Oh my gosh, why are you drooping like this? Because the weight of the skirt is going to make the armhole sag even lower than what it currently is. What in the world? Hang on a second. Okay, anyway, my armhole, it is what it is at this point because I'm having so many issues with just everything on this. And it actually says in the instructions at this point, you did it, stop, you deserve a break, fizzy water time. Well, that's lovely for them. I took a break a while ago, so I'm going to keep on going. And it looks like because I am doing the sleeveless version, they're going to have us do more of a burrito method kind of side seam thing here. So what I need to do is get my bodice organized, kind of laying it how it should be with all of my edges together like this, nicely on my board. So let me get that in place and try to get it so it looks somewhat like their diagram here. So I am just putting a few pins in here to hold it at the shoulder seam, down here at the edge, the side seam here, just to kind of hold it together where it looks like it would make sense for it to be. You can't see that, but okay, so just pinning it, and I'm sticking my pins in long ways here so that when I roll it up they won't stab me, hopefully. So now after I pin the very front one, I'll have it somewhat matching up over here too. And this is my front, this is my little back neckline, this is going to be my back over here. And if we take their diagram for their step number 14, it says roll up one side toward the other. When you reach the other side, stop. When you reach the other side, stop. Okay, so I'm just going to roll this up. And so I guess when they say when you reach the other side means when you cross the center, maybe. All right, so I'm going to stop right about here where I still have some of this visible, and this is rolled up that way. Again, this is my outer part here. We're looking at this. It says reach under and pull the bottom layer, which is the facing armhole, out and over the rolled section of the bodice. Okay, so I pulled my pins out. This is the top layer. My facing is the bottom layer. So if I reach under and pull the bottom layer, this one here, okay, and out and over the rolled section of the bodice like this, okay? And so I'm going to pull this over here like this, and this over here like, well, shoot, I still have a pin here. Hang on. Got to pull these pins out. Like this. Okay, now we are only going to be working with the armhole section at this point. So I hope you caught what I just did, because I don't want to undo it because this fabric is kind of a pain. All right, so I'm going to be matching up now the shoulder seam first, pinning both seam allowances open as I am tending to do. And there you go. Down here where the bottom of this armhole is, I'm going to pin that together like that. Over here where the bottom of this armhole piece is, pinning this together like that. Okay, and then everything else in between should just kind of blend, and it looks like it does. So I'm going to pin a few points in these positions too, because this stuff just wants to go everywhere. Okay, so now that that is pinned, I'm going to go ahead and sew this seam at 5/8 of an inch from here all the way to here. Okay, so that is done, and they're going to tell you they want you to trim it and grade it and clip it and all kinds of things. Well, this is a very stretchy knit, and for the same reasons I said before, instead of grading, I'm just pinking it, you know, and I think that just doing that is going to give all the flexibility I need for this knit. So, clipping it all the way down here. At this point, I do not want to understitch this armhole because I think that would push me over the edge, because this thing is just nuts. Okay, so now it says, reach into the middle of the burrito and turn the whole thing right side out and understitch it. Oh, they do want you to understitch it. Okay. All right, so here is my blouse. So if you've been watching a while and you know me, you know I'm a big fan of understitching. I really am. But this thing is pushing me over the edge right now, if you can't tell. And I don't think I'm going to be able to get in this little area and do a lot of understitching in here. So it would just be this little piece and that little piece, and it's a tie-dye knit anyway. So I might just press it normally, you know, flat, and call that good. I'm going to skip. I know I can hear it now, but I'm going to skip the understitching on this armhole because no one should be looking at my underarm that closely anyway. Now they want you to do it again and sew together the opposite side. So this is my side over here that is still open, okay? So I am rolling up the edge here of the side that I already did until I get to about this point. I need to pull out all these pins. The pins were just to help me keep it kind of organized because it was too much. So I'm looking at the right side. I'm separating my two layers. I'm pulling the bottom side over the top up here at the shoulder and matching that up first and getting that pinned in place before I pull the rest of it over, just so that I have something that is organized correctly. Okay, so I know that needs to get stitched together, so I'm going to turn this thing a little bit. Put that over here, that over there, and get this matched up. And the same down here now, flipping this over, there, that underneath. Okay, so now I have the rest of this that I can match up together. And get these all pinned together. And again, we're only worrying about stitching the armhole area. So just like last time, I'm going to get it pinned together, stitch this at 5/8 of an inch, pink off half of the seam allowance, and then flip it right side out and just press those armholes flat. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out how to do these side seams here. It looks like we need to turn this whole thing so that it is right sides together. Okay, so I need to make sure I keep my facing in my outside fabric straight. And I can tell the one with the gathering stitches is my outside fabric. The one without is my facing. I need to sew, this is my front facing piece to my back facing piece. So over here on the other side of this armhole, I'm going to grab the back facing piece and match it up. Okay, so this is the seam line here from that underarm. And if I move these over, again, gathering stitches, outside bodice, no gathering stitches, facing piece, okay? So I want my little seam allowances to go towards my facing, just as if they were understitched. And I'm going to put a little pin right here. Then I'm going to go ahead and match up this front facing to my back facing over here. I'm going to stick a couple pins because I love wearing knits, but sewing with them, you know, can sometimes be a pain. Okay, and over here, putting those two together and matching that up. And then I'm going to stitch straight across here at 5/8 of an inch all the way across. And once I get that done and I can make sure that it's correct, then I'm going to match up and do the other side. Okay, so this is my armhole seam here facing outside bodice. Okay, so I got that sewed and I just held up at the shoulder seam here. I'm looking at the outside back side here, and it looks correct. To me, that looks like a good side seam, underarm side seam. The outside layers are sewed together. The inside layers are sewed together. I think we're good. I believe we're good. I hope we're good. So I'm going to do the same thing over here to this side, okay? So this is the armhole area, all right? And I'm going to bring the bottom of this armhole seam together like this and match up that seam line, and that's going to help me get everything started. It honestly wouldn't hurt if you left this seam allowance open so it was pressed open. That wouldn't be a bad thing either. I'm just kind of on a roll to pressing them all to one side right now. Okay, so now I'm going to pin this side together and then the other side, and then stitch it at 5/8 of an inch. And after that, we're going to shake the whole thing out and see if it kind of resembles a self-lined bodice. All right, so we've got that done, and I'm just looking ahead, and we're going to be putting this midriff piece on, and they say if you want to, you can interface your midriff piece. But here's my concern. There's no like opening in this, so I'm assuming the entire thing is something that you pull over your head when you want to put it on. And I'm concerned that if you interface the midriff piece, it's not going to stretch. And it looks like that piece, you know, is more fitted. So I'm not going to do that. I want to make sure I can pull this thing on, you know. I think that that's important at this stage. So we're just going to skip that. I have 2 of each, 2 fronts and 2 backs cut out. So we're just going to go with that. I'm going to need to sew the two of them together, so sew my front pieces to my back pieces, but they look the same to me. The only thing that's different about them is the little notch placement. So yeah, they look very similar. So I'm going to go ahead and on my back pieces, put a letter B in the middle. Well, that's not going to even show up, is it? So we will find a different way to mark these things. I'm going to put a piece of tape on the back. That's what I'm going to do. So this is a back piece and this one is a back piece, just so I can keep them straight, okay? But what it's going to want you to do is mark the notches, and I still need to do that. Mark the notches and then sew the two pieces together. So let me get that marked up first. Okay, so I'm going to put a back one here, and this is the top of it. You know what? I'm going to put a little T at the top, just so I can keep track of that. Not that it makes a difference, not sure yet. And I'm putting this one also with its top. Oh, I need to flip this around, don't I? Yes, I do. Okay, so I'm going to put this one on top. So this is the front and the back. I'm going to sew each side at 5/8 of an inch, and then they want you to trim those, so that's fine. I will pink those edges also and get these sewn up on here. All right, so at this point, I'm going to deviate slightly from the instructions, because what they're going to want you to do is gather the front in order to match the midriff, okay? I'm not going to do that because this is very stretchy, and I already reinforced my facing piece to make sure that it would hold its shape. So before I even put these on, I am going to gather the bottom edge of my front bodice to the bottom edge of my front bodice facing, okay? So remember, I've put this stay tape where the notch started, and I have gathering stitches where that notch starts. So I'm just going to pin it together so everything is good up until that point. It's all nice and even, okay? And it's going to be the same thing on this side, pinning together. And I'm just pushing these side seam allowances open at this point. I believe this is a very, very unnecessarily, but you know, whatever, complicated pattern. Let's hope that it's worth the effort when we're all done, you know? So anyway, pinning my outside fabric to my facing fabric, starting out, okay? So it's like this. Facing in the middle is smaller than the outside. I need to find my center of my facing, so I'm just gonna fold these together, find that point, and that is what the center point on here, where I have that little pleat, that's where that's gonna match up. And I'm just gonna pin that on right here, and then I'm just gonna pull the gathering threads on either side here. Let me get it matched up correctly again. Sorry about that. Okay. So from the side seam to this notch, it's nice and flat. Between the two notches is where the gathers are, okay? So, let me find my threads. They've disappeared somewhat. Okay, there we go. So now I'm just going to pull my gathering threads here until I can get it so that it's matching up with the facing part where I have that reinforcement tape, and then I will pin this to my facing. Sorry about that. Okay, once I have it gathered up so it lays nice and flat, I'll pin it to that facing and then show you how much we have gathered in. Okay, looks like a decent amount of gather right there before we stitch it across at 5/8 of an inch. But you know what, there's gathers on the back side too, so I might just do this whole thing at once. So yeah, what I've done on the front, I'm going to do on the back too, where I match up my outside fabric to the bodice fabric, pull in these gathers so I have like a single unit at the bottom of my bodice to work with. Okay, so I've got it all pinned together, and while I was doing it, I made a decision on how I'm going to handle this. First, I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and just sew these two layers together, and I'm going to put a line of stitching kind of like right in between those two gathering threads. I'm just going to put a row of stitching there. Once I have that done and I know that it's behaving well, then I'm going to take it over to my serger and just serge that raw edge so that they will act as a single unit at that point. I'm going to try not to take any fabric off, but just to get these two edges kind of encapsulated together. I think that that'll make it easier going forward to the next step, which is dealing with these little midriff pieces. Okay, so I've got that done. All right, I'm feeling a little more secure about that. So now it's time to deal with this midriff piece. And remember, I put a tape on the back. And so this is the front. And I can tell from the placement of my notches right there that this is the top part, okay? So the top part of my midriff matches to the bottom part of my bodice. So I'm going to put it here and at side seam right here. Go ahead and match those seams up. And then come over here to this side seam. And I'm thinking I'm going to need to stretch this fabric slightly, which is fine. It's just a single layer, so that's fine. Okay, so that is it pinned to the outside. The center of this piece would have been nice to have had marked. So for right now, I'm just going to fold it in half like this and match it up to the center front pleat position right here. Okay. And on the back, I'm going to do the same thing, matching up the two center backs. Okay, I want to explain something that kind of did not go according to plan, but I'm going to explain the way I'm going to fix it. And basically, when I went to pin my bodice onto my midriff pieces were a lot more narrow than my bodice, even when I gathered my bodice to the lining. Okay, so I could, because it is a knit, I could just stretch my midriff piece out, sew it on, and then, you know, hopefully, look at my hair, hopefully it would, you know, come back together again. But I think that I have enough thickness in everything here that I was afraid that that would leave my midriff part stretched out of sorts. So what I'm doing is I am going to use some clear elastic. This is that little plasticky kind of elastic. And I'm using this to reinforce the gathers, I guess you can say. I'm elastifying the gathers of my bodice so that it will fit my midriff. And the cool thing about this stuff is it will come back to its original size. Okay, so I'm basically going to cut, I already did one side of it just to make sure it would work. I'm cutting a piece of elastic to the width that my gathers should be according to my midriff piece and sewing it on, and then it's going to be able to fit well. That's my hope right now. So let me tip the camera down and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so this is my midriff front. The part that is going to be gathered is between the notch and the center fold. Okay, so if I measure that, from that notch to the center fold is 5 3/4 inches. Okay, so if I double that, well, it's going to be 12 inches minus half, 11 1/2 inches that I need. So what I'm going to do is cut a piece of elastic. If I go 11.5 inches, I'm actually going to go 12 inches, and that's going to give me an extra 1/4 inch on each side that I can, you know, pin down and anchor and everything with. I don't know how this is going to work. You know, it's all an experiment, but sometimes that's the fun in doing projects. So this is the back, okay? And you can see I have my elastic just stitched on there. And it's giving the entire back piece a little bit of stretch. But it's going to make it want to come back to a elastic area that should match up with the midriff piece. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm sewing this in that smaller seam allowance, okay? So down here, and I'm actually doing it on the right side, where my notch is, which is the point where my gathering stitches start, I'm going to pin the beginning of my little elastic right here. Going right through it, okay? And then coming way over here, making sure this is not twisted, to the opposite end of those gathering stitches, which is also a notch, and pinning the elastic on this side. And as I'm at my sewing machine, I will just stretch it as I go. So I'll start it here, you know, sew a few stitches on that elastic so it'll be anchored in place, and then stretch the whole thing out because it'll stretch really far, and just sew it over all of those other stitches, okay? All right, so I've got that sewn on. So now I'm going back to match up the side seams on my midriff piece. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do both of them at the same time. Why not? Why not throw that little extra on top of everything else? So, making sure that I am using the top of the front, and this is the top and the front. So I'm putting one midriff piece on the outside, one on the inside here, stretching all the way over to this side, making sure that I have this midriff piece. This is my inside one. Got my seam allowances opened and matching that up to the side seam over here. I'm just going to stick a pin on there real quick to hold it while I deal with this side. Okay, so opening this one up, making sure those seam allowances are open, and pinning that whole thing together. Lots of thickness right there. All right, so now that I have all of this elastic in place here, this should fit a lot better, I'm hoping. And it looks like it kind of does, kind of, sort of. We will see. I'm just going to try to match up where the center naturally wants to kind of fall here on this piece and the sides. And I can tell that where this notch is, it is matching up well. I don't like all of this bulkiness here. I don't like it, but we'll see what we can do. After it's sewn, I may be able to trim a bunch of that stuff off so that it's not such a bad amount of bulkiness right there. Okay, so now that I have the outside pinned on here, I'm going to do the inside also, you know, just the same. And then once I have it all done up on the front, then I'm going to do the back too. And let me get all that pinned, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how I'm going to handle it from here. Okay, so at this point I have it pinned on, both the inside and the outside piece all the way around. And I have it pinned like every inch, lots of pins, just because I don't want anything to go wrong here. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it with the machine at a 5/8 inch seam allowance from this cut edge here. I'm just going to go very slowly, making sure everything is laying as it should as I go around. Okay, so this is my bodice front. Here's my little V neckline. There is my midriff. Holy cow, this is not a quick and easy little knit dress, I can tell you that. If I fold these together I am debating how much I'm going to trim out of the seam allowance. I think what I am going to do though is trim it. I think that that would give me a nicer look. So with my pinking shears, making sure the only thing I am trimming is this gathered part here in between this, the seam allowances of both the inside midriff piece and the outside midriff piece I'm leaving whole. Okay, it's just this part, and really it's just the gathered portions between the two notches of both the front and the back that I am going to be pinking out about half of that width of. Okay, so now that that is trimmed out, it is feeling better, so glad about that. What I need to do now is come down here to this bottom edge of the midriff and match the two layers together all the way around. And then I'm going to come back and stitch it all the way around here, just like at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just to hold those two layers together. Okay, and I can tell my camera battery is running low again. I think I need to buy new batteries for my camera. It's these guys. I got one here so I can grab another set. It seems like after about a year they all die on me and they don't hold a charge anymore. So I am going to get this sewed, order a new pack of batteries, and then I will be back. Hello and welcome to the next day. So at this point, our bodice is pretty much done. It's got this fun wrap fold thing going right here, which I hope carries through once I put it on my body. This was a whole lot more work up here than I thought it was going to be, so this project is taking me longer. So we are going to turn this into a 2-week project at this point, but that's okay. That's okay. At this point, we have done all of this stuff, so we're getting ready to go to the skirt process. In general, what I'm going to be doing, because up here none of the seams were visible, they were all encased, okay? Over here on the skirt, basically I'm going to sew them like normal on my regular sewing machine, but then once I have them sewed, I am going to come and once I have them sewed and I know that they are in the appropriate place, then I'm going to come and serge both of those raw edges together, okay? Usually I serge ahead of time on wovens. On this one I'm going to do that slightly different. So the first thing I'm going to do is the skirts front and the skirt back look very, very similar, so I need to make sure I mark those. But we're just going to sew up the center front. There's just one seam going up the center front of each one of those. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quick, and I will be right back. Okay, so just to show you what I was talking about, this is my center back piece, okay? And so I sewed it with my regular machine and then serged it together. And right now I'm going to stick this little piece of green tape across the back, and just to make sure it doesn't fall off, I'm going to pin it on to mark that this is my back piece, okay? And a lot of people will ask, well, why don't you just stick another thread on your serger and just serge it instead of doing both steps? And the reason is because I know that I am a fallible human being, and I know that from experience. And it is a lot easier to fix a mistake if it's just a regular seam. Sorry for the morning sun here. If it's just a regular machine, than if you've serged it and trimmed it and overcast it. You know, just from experience, sometimes things happen and you need to pull that seam out. And pulling out a serged seam that has been cut is a whole lot more difficult. So to me, it's worth the extra, 1 minute to do it in 2 different steps. And that is all I'm going to say about that. So this is my back, okay? I'm going to go ahead and do the front the same way. And then they're going to have us put gathering stitches up here at the top. And I have not marked my notches, so I am going to go ahead and just do that with a pen on here, marking it, because I am not a fan of marking on knits because they just want to go everywhere, you know. In addition to the notches, there are on the side over here these 2 dots and a notch here, and those are for button place, for pocket placement. So I will put those on shortly, but what I wanted to show you is for the gathering stitches, you're going to run them between the notches, okay? So from this point here to this point here, I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches. I'm not serging this top because it's going to be stuck up inside that midriff, okay? But I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches, one at about 1/4 inch, one at about 3/8 of an inch, all the way across here. And I'm going to do the exact same thing to the front. There's also 2 notches on the front. So what I'm doing here, I'll do in the front. The only difference it's going to look like is this little piece of green tape. Okay, so that is done. There's my gathering stitches. Yeah, that one got a little wonky, but it's still in the seam allowance, so we're okay. I need to get my pockets out here, and I am actually not going to mark the circles on all of these pocket pieces right now, but I am going to clip this notch because I transferred that notch onto all of my skirt pieces, and I think that that's going to be very usable for getting everything matched up. So what I'm going to be doing is the same, what I'm doing here, I'm going to do on all of my pieces on both sides. So this is my skirt back, but you know, same thing. This here is the notch. Oh shoot, I need to put it face up. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is my skirt back. I'm just gonna, where this notch is right here, that's the notch right there, okay? I'm going to get a pocket piece that I can match this notch up with that and pin it up. And it looks like it's matching up exactly at the very top. So that is extremely helpful. That way I can double check myself. If this notch matches and up here matches, then we are good. And I'm going to be sewing these on. I need to sew it at a slightly smaller seam allowance. They are calling for a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, which is fine. So on all 4 pocket pieces, matching it up this way, 1/4 inch seam allowance straight up, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I wanted to show you, once I sewed my pockets on, I came back and I serged this seam where the pocket is, but I stopped at this point because when I sew this part, I'm going to want to serge all of that together. You will see, but I just wanted to point that out. This little part is serged. So let's sew the front skirt and the back skirt together. I'm just going to, what is this one? This is my front. Doesn't matter, honestly, because they're very similar. Laying that out here, I'm going to put my back down on top of it. Okay, so let's just take a look at this side, and what I do here, again, I will do on the other side. The first thing is I'm going to match up this seam where my pockets are sewed on, and I am pushing that seam allowance out towards my pocket. And I'm just going to pin that carefully right here. Oh, so many layers, so many layers. Okay. And I'm also going to pin all the way around my pocket piece and down here at the bottom. Oh, this fabric. Keeping the seam allowance going out towards the pocket underneath here, okay? On the bottom one and the top one here. Push this seam allowance over, going out that way. I'm going to match this seam up down here. That looks pretty good. And go ahead and match up around my pocket, oops, and down this side right here, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got that pinned around, pinning quite a lot because this fabric is not behaving very well. One thing I want to make sure of is that this seam line on this side is matched up with that same seam line on the other side. So I'm just going to stick a pin through it here and make sure it's coming out at the right place on this side, you know, right there in that seam line. and go ahead and anchor that in just to keep this part behaving. So the way that I'm going to be sewing this, remember we have these 2 dots that I drew on the skirt piece. I'm going to be using those. Let's see here. They are not actually going to have you sew around the top, so we're going to have to do this in a couple different steps. The first thing is this dot should be 5/8 of an inch in from the cut edge. I serged 1/8 of an inch off, so I'm going with 1/2 inch seam right here. It honestly wouldn't make that much of a difference if I went 5/8 of an inch, but that's good. Okay, so putting my ruler up here at the top. You know what, let me get you a little bit closer. All right, so drawing straight from the top, the appropriate size from this cut edge all the way down, and I'm gonna put another pin just over that stitching line just to hold it, okay? I'm gonna come from here to this point, you know, back stitch, call that good. Then I'm gonna start up here at the top of this pocket. They say don't sew this, so we're not. So starting up here, coming down at 5/8 of an inch, all the way around this bottom edge of the pocket here, okay? Now we have another dot right here. And again, I need to make sure that that's in a good spot on both sides, so I'm gonna poke my pin through, and yeah, I am the same amount from the stitching line here. Yeah, the dot on this side is slightly higher. That doesn't matter. What matters is the amount in and the approximate size of the dot, okay, or position of the dot. So if that is where my dot is right there, and I'm just gonna stick my pin in here to hold that fabric together. When I'm coming up here at 5/8 of an inch, I am gonna start aiming for this dot. And it's really, really important that these seam allowances here stay going towards the pocket, okay? You don't want either the top or the bottom one to get flipped over that way. That would be bad, okay? So just to make sure, because this fabric is not well behaved, I'm gonna pin those seam allowances like that. I'll have lots to unpin. But anyway, I'm coming around here, going over these seam allowances to this dot. Then with the needle down, I'm gonna pivot and come down this way. And I'm gonna be about 1/4 inch in from this seam line, okay? So I'm gonna come down this way. Once I get below the pocket, once again, I will be 5/8 of an inch from this cut edge. And then take that all the way down. So, once again, starting out here, coming to this point, anchor it off. And then starting up here at 5/8, coming all the way around up here, over these seam allowances, to this dot, needle down, pivot it, and then come down here, all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that done. I'm just going to do it on this side and then pin the other side because that's a lot of pins. All right, so I've got that done, and after I sewed my pocket on, I did serge around. So starting up here, coming down, just kind of swooping in and then taking it down to the bottom. So this seam allowance is actually going to be going towards the front. So this is my front, I know, because it does not have the green tape, okay? And so, getting my gathering threads out of the way here. There you go. This whole pocket is going to be coming towards that front. So I'm just going to kind of fold it at that seam line that I just made up here. Okay, that seam line is going to be my side seam. Stick a pin up at the top. And, ooh, unfortunately, this pocket comes just beyond where that is. I was hoping to stitch it down the entire way. It looks like I'm just going to have to pin it at this point. I could just do a little basting stitch from about this point over, just to hold it. That could be a good thing. Actually, that could be a very good thing. I think I'll do that. The main thing is I want to make sure I don't go beyond that point. If you can see where my gathering threads start here, okay? I want to make sure I don't go into where those gathering threads are. So from about this point over, I'm just going to stitch those down at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to keep this pocket being held in this position. And the same thing on the other side. Okay, got that done. And I need to start attaching this skirt here to my bodice. So I'm going to work on the front first. And this is the front of my bodice. I can tell because of that V. Okay, so I'm going to put it, ooh, you know what? I need to turn my skirt right side out. No, it would be better if I did it this way. All right, so I'm going to stick my blouse or the bodice inside of this skirt and making sure I'm putting the front here. That's the front with the V. Open this up and set it inside. Okay, I need to know where that center front point is. And I am looking. Okay, this is that seam right here for the center front. So if I fold it along that seam, I'm going to call this point right here center front. Okay. Now the underneath part, there's 2 layers of this midriff. The bottom one, I'm just going to let that go away for a minute. No, I cannot. They are sewed together. Okay, but they do want us to sew them to leave them together, so that's fine. Okay, so taking the center front here of my midriff and matching that up with the center front seam of my skirt, I'm going to go ahead and pin that. Now this skirt is heavy. They weren't lying when they said it's going to be heavy. So it's heavy and misbehaving, as you do. Okay, so now here's the side seam where my pocket is. And I'm going to bring that over here and find my side seam. Oh my gosh, here it is. Okay, it all is kind of blending together. So matching those 2 up, making sure my pockets and all of this stuff is going towards the front. Okay, so get that pinned together there. Go around, match the center back and the other side seam, and I'll be right back. Okay, once those 4 points are secure, then I'm coming over here and I'm going to match up my notches on my midriff to, well, the notch on my skirt is where this line is, where all of those gathering stitches are, okay? So get that matched up on both sides of the front and the back. Okay, so I've got it pinned in place, and now the place that needs to be gathered is very obvious here. So I'm just going to pull my gathering threads until this is going to lay nice and flat. That looks pretty good. Tie it off, pull this side until it's nice and flat, smooth all of these out, make them nice and even in that space, you know. And then once I have all of my gathers in, I'm going to sew all the way around the top at 5/8 inch. Okay, so as you can see, that's, honey, stop it. That is about the amount of gathers that I have going across the side. Oh, shoot, excuse me. She needs attention desperately. But that's about the amount of gathering I have in the front. Hang on a second. This is what you're hearing. She was desperately wanting attention, so, you know, the sewing room cat, you know. Anyhow, I think that she is properly loved on now, so popping her back down and back to my skirt. Okay, so what I was trying to show you is that this is the amount of gathers I have. It's not a whole lot, but it's enough. So I'm going to try to make sure when I'm sewing it that I am actually looking at this side so that when I'm sewing it, I can pay attention to where all these little gathers are and make sure that they don't want to get ruffly. Okay, so that is done. We are almost done with this dress. Now, I just held it up to myself. I was thinking it was going to be shorter than it is. I think it's because it is so long that it is coming closer to my ankles. It's actually coming closer to this length on me, even though I thought I was cutting it that length, to give you an idea. So when you cut yours out, it's going to stretch if it's a knit because it's big and heavy. I'm just going to hem this up, narrow hem, but what I'm going to do is turn my iron on first, and to make my life easier, I am going to use up probably the last of this little roll of stitch witchery, okay? So let me trim this little nasty bit off here, which is some of the seam allowance and the little tail end of my serging. And basically what I'm going to do is turn up the bottom edge. I'm going to eyeball it. I'm not going to measure it all the way around, but probably a little less than an inch, okay? But instead of just pinning it or sewing it, sorry, my sister and I are having a running debate on the proper way to spell quando, because Engelbert Humperdinck does not spell it the traditional way. So anyway, that's what the beeps are going on. Anyway, I digress. I'm putting this stitch witchery under here, turning it up, and I'm going to press it. And that's going to give me a really, really nice edge that I can then just come over and stitch straight across, and I'm not going to get any shifting or wrinkles. So let me go ahead and do that. Oh, and I also wanted to point out, after I sewed my skirt on, I did come back and just serge around that top edge, okay? So it looks like that on the inside at the top of my skirt. All right, so I just wanted to show you before I go on. See how nice and flat and everything that is? And this is just glue and it'll melt. So it will still stretch. The stitch witchery does not hinder the stretch at all. But that way I can come back and stitch, and it's going to give me a really crisp little edge on my knit hem. All right, volume. Yes, I do. Okay, there are barn swallows dive bombing me right now because I think that they just built some nests in this barn. They usually do the other one. So if you see them going through, that's what it is. I like the dress. This up here was a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be, but the finished product, very comfortable, easy to pull on and off. Just be aware that the skirt kind of grows. They were concerned that the underarms were too low. I don't find that to be an issue. So it is all good. All good, very comfy. I'm glad I made it sleeveless. It feels like it should be a sleeveless type of a dress to me. So anyway, got hair in my mouth here. I'm gonna go ahead and get out of these little barn swallows' way because they are so upset that I am near their babies. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
My bucolic life, we have the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful tie houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.